Now it's recording. Now we're
Okay,
recording.
let's start
So
again.
let's start again. Stephan, welcome to Talking to People on the Grid. And we are learning about you today and your background. Stephan is based in Boston and is a nationally renowned personal innovation strategist, business thinker, and executive coach, and founder of the Human Innovation Garage, which we're going to learn about from Stephan, is combining human, as in people, innovation, and figuring out what people need inside that area, or that, in terms of innovation and people and what's needed in business today. So do you want to sort of tell us a little bit about that and how you sort of
Sure.
became a business coach and started
So,
with the Innovation Garage?
so first off, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. Um, Human Innovation Garage, I think there's really three pieces which I think are very, very important to kind of dissect individually. My passion always have been human beings. The part even as a very consistent where I started my career, which was frankly in hospitality, which is obviously people, which is experiences, which is experience in the context of external and internal. And I'm going to go back to that in a moment, why that is important. Innovation around external as well as internal, because I think we're very focused on, how can we create impact on the outside, but how do we really identify inherently beautiful pieces we have, and how do we innovate ourselves? Because over the course of the years, from childhood all the way to adult, teenager, adult, young adult, etc., we have experiences, we have interactions which oftentimes narrow us into a particular niche or narrow us into particular experiences, which we then, in coaching, we talk a lot about identification of patterns. If we don't do the pattern identification and we understand what serves us and what doesn't serve us, very similar like with innovation, because we make innovation so complicated oftentimes, we get stuck. And the third piece being the garage, tool sets, resources, tried and trusted resources where just as you drop off your car in the garage, where you bring it to get fixed up, so to speak, but it's not a quick fix. It's really, teaching people how to fish. And that's the important piece. It's not fishing for people. It is fishing with people together and then ultimately setting them back free to do what they do best, which goes back to the innovation piece. So connecting those three pieces was a great passion of mine, which I've always enjoyed, if that was in hospitality, if that was in my startup world over starting 6 companies. 3 I talk about, 3 not so much. But in the context, always impacting people, because a big part of my startup and then entrepreneurial career was education technology, which obviously in the part of the world that I was in, which was Southeast Asia, the effect on people and how do I really impact people's lives on a very micro level, which then becomes macro, was so satisfying and such a passion of mine. And I'll leave it at that for the moment. That Human Innovation Garage just made perfect sense.
So your clients today are very much leaders of companies, CEOs of companies. You're coaching them.
Correct. So I work with really, frankly, all levels of leaders, right? I think it goes back to the book of Tribes, Seth Godin, who can be a leader, right? Because I think the mistake is you don't have to be a designated leader to be a leader. There's a lot of invisible leaders. And I think the beauty of it is, again, going back to what we just spoke about, if I'm able to let you know that you can be a leader at any level, that you can be a leader by taking ownership, by believing in what it may be that you believe in, and be blunt about it, be outspoken about it, be bold about it, and making your case, well, that's leadership, right? The consistency, the clarity of expression, that can happen at any level. There's a lot of people who I think we call leaders, or like to call themselves, I'm a leader. And I think that's probably something we should examine in our conversation a little further. What is leadership really? And what entitles you to be a leader? Because leaders, it's like I've said it on the podcast not too long ago. There's a lot of politicians, but there's not a lot of statesmen. And that's, for me, a little bit the distinction between somebody who's a manager and somebody who's a leader. And happy to examine that more.
And nowadays, I mean, a lot of people are trying to create more of an agile workforce where everybody has a voice.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's important to empower, not just leaders, but the people on the team to give them a voice, and that everybody is treated as an equal.
That's right. That's right. And I
So
think, I mean, you said a couple of key words. I'm sorry. You said a couple of key words, and one of them, which sticks always out to me, is empowerment. But how can I empower you to see the inherent beauty of your power, so to speak? And how can I serve and support that? Which then, where we really start the conversation of servant leadership. How do I uplift the person around me? How do I help them to see the strength that they should be building on, without having that selfish attitude of credit, which oftentimes what we call leaders in our society and in organizations, it's all about blame and corporate blame and shame and leadership in the context of credit, of accomplishment. And that's not leadership.
Not at all. So tell us about, you're working also, as part of the Innovation Garage, you have a platform called Talent Optimization.
Yeah.
And you are a partner in that business. So how do you use that platform to help companies?
So we, over the years, realized that there is obviously a requirement on larger companies in particular, where there needs to be some data science, let's call it that for the moment, which allows a particular performance metric. And when I hear performance metrics and data in the context of people, usually I always shrug up a little bit. So we partnered about a year and a half ago with a company which has behavioral assessments and cognitive assessments, where over the course of my career, working with various other competitors in the field who are companies like DISC, etc., a lot of people will relate to that. The company in particular we're working with now is Predictive Index, and we're a global partner there, has developed a short, really succinct, let's call it for the sake of the discussion, test, which allows me to really self-identify how I operate, and from the behavioral assessment side. And the way we use it is really kind of building that triangulation between, so in knowledge, oftentimes I talk about the triangulation of there's education, there's knowledge, and then there's competency. And I think in talent optimization, it's a very similar piece. There's obviously my foundational background of what I went to school for and what I learned and what I'm passionate about and what I want to do and what I've done. And then there's the need, the strategic need of the business. So how does my, how does my talent, how does my skill in particular fit into bringing the vision further along of the organization? So building that triangulation and understanding how an individual falls into the strategic roadmap of the company without making them be something that they are not, that's really where talent optimization becomes part of servant leadership, essentially, to me. Because if I'm able to identify and help the individual identify where their strengths and their weaknesses are, cater to their strength, potentially help coaching what we then call a talent optimization blueprint, and where we look at an organizational optimization blueprint, where we then say, okay, how can we take the combination of identifying who you are with a behavioral assessment, identifying what is the strategic direction of the company and the organization, and how can we help you through coaching, through training, through upskilling, through various other resources to either kind of fit into the direction that you want to upskill yourself, but no longer taking the square peg and drilling it into a round hole, because oftentimes that's what we seem to do in organization with complete disregard of who the organization needs, is, but more importantly, who the individual is and what the individual has as needs to really flourish. Because take a playground where there's 20 kids, 30 kids running around. Each of those children will engage in what they enjoy most. And it's immensely beautiful. It's a lot of fun to watch it. And they're all enjoying themselves. if we can kind of, in a simplistic way, translate that into an organization and give everybody their corner in the playground where they're really, really good at it and they really, really have fun. One kid may sit in the corner and build a sandcastle. The other one may play with 3 friends with a soccer ball. The next one may just play with the basketball in the corner and dribble it around. And the third one may just sit there and observe.
Yes.
And all those pieces are necessary because that's what makes the world go round. Rather than saying, well, you all have to be, playing soccer, or you all have to be playing basketball, or you all have to be playing tennis, or you all have to jump up and down right now, right this moment. There's moments to do that. I think there is an important piece. And I think when we talk about education, the Finnish classroom model has shown us that there's moments to teach, there's moments to have them engage, there's moments to have them self-occupied in terms of exercising and using their own creativity. And I think that's exactly, let's call it that, the playground we have to give people in organizations. And I believe, and I'm a strong believer in that, what we do is, in the context of talent optimization, really helping companies identifying, who's the basketball player, who's the soccer player, who's the guy who likes to cook food, and who's the guy who just likes to sit and observe. And then it becomes really a question, sometimes, just like in personal relationships, and you and I had an opportunity to talk about that a little bit, there's a beginning and there's an ending. There are moments where sometimes it's okay for people to recognize, wow, you know what? I'm not at the right spot here. I'm not in the right company. I had this amazing experience probably about 6 months ago. And I was working with one of my clients, which is a production company. And I was literally sitting in the conference room with the majority of their team. And there was a gentleman who was very, so when we got the behavioral assessment back, I was not surprised. He's an innovator, he's creative, he's a leader, he's showing all these characters. But,
is it like Myers-Briggs, this test?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly. And it's one of those things where he then suddenly says, oh my God, I'm looking at my test. I'm realizing that I'm totally in the wrong position in this company. The CEO and I, we already had spoken about this, that probably will be the outcome. But sometimes the gift you can give somebody by helping them understand who they are and how they fit into the bigger picture. And for them themselves to be able to say, I don't think this is right for me, is such a relief, not just for the team, but for the individual, because you're taking that burden off, expectation off. You're taking that burden off what we learned from little on, where, we are conformists. If you're conforming to what I tell you, well, then you're safe. Well, that's bullshit. And that's the piece, I think, where a lot of times we kind of get caught in.
So you're matching the skills with the tasks.
Absolutely. It's not just matching the skills with the tasks, but it's just kind of also giving the individual there, a little bit of
empowering them. The personal freedom. Personal freedom, exactly, because so many people they're not actually sure about what their role is in life. It's being able to say, look, this is what you're good at. This is, what you can naturally do. But actually, when it comes to their weaknesses, how do you help with them with their weaknesses? Because it's also important to work on their weaknesses.
Absolutely. And, I think, so one of the big things I always talk about is what I call radical self-awareness. How do I help you through a particular dialogue process, guided dialogue? And that's really where coaching comes in quite a bit. And executive coaching. So it's not so much about what we do. We don't really get too much into business coaching. Business coaching, and let me make the distinction. I'm not coming in and saying to you, oh, wow, you're in an accounting business, and in an accounting business, you should be doing A, B, C, and D. That's really not A, that's not what I'm passionate about. And B, we work really, really agnostic of the industry. So that's an important piece to remember. As an example, today we're working with a small airline, we're working with a fashion maker, we're working with an Olympic athlete, we're working with a judge, we're working with a Reiki practitioner, we're working with a financial planner, et cetera, et cetera. So a mortgage banker, a banker who runs a multi-branch offices in the city. And so I think that's an important piece to remember, because self-awareness, I believe, is one of the greatest catalysts to personal growth. Then clearer I am why I'm making choices, or why I have made choices in the past. And then clearer I am to understand the trigger points, which are, I mean, it's America's favorite excuse, and please nobody take this offensive. I get triggered. Okay, what are you telling me? That you didn't have any control in the moment that you made the choice to do something? And then the answer usually is yes. Well, so there was a choice. Because I would say, except if we're sitting in a really terrible situation on the highway and something happens to us because somebody drives into us, God forbid, there's always a moment of choice. There always is a moment of choice. Now, even as an addict, or as somebody who is in a medical condition, there comes, even there is the moment of choice. I may not be equipped to make the choice because I have addictive behaviors or something else, and I can't make that choice. But even there is the moment of, okay, I'm doing the same thing again, but I'm going to go do it, because there's the weakness of being able to make a different choice.
Yeah. So it's recognizing.
Exactly. That's just a fact. So in business, I apply a very, very similar principle. Where I say, okay, if you are able to understand and identify a pattern of behavior that you've moved down the road, and that is serving you or not serving you, either if it's serving you, do more of it. And if it's not serving you, let's identify at what moment there is kind of a breakdown where there's a complete disconnect between what needs to be done and what you're choosing to do. And I think that's where, then again, going back to your question, how do we help people? How do I help people at that moment identify, what is the pattern, but then also identify what needs to be the behavior in order to, if there is self-improvement requirement or there is the desire to change that behavior, how can we support that? And how can we find, which goes back to the garage, what's the tool set that we can employ at that moment, which can be simple things. It can be meditation. It can be journaling. Journaling is a very powerful piece, because journaling usually is the recording of events that already happened. Right? Even in terms of thought, the moment you journal, that thought has happened, you've processed it, and you've recorded it. If you do a similar thing in journaling, which goes back to, I mean, I often recommend it to people who are debating, well, am I going to stay at this company or not? I recommend to them journaling when there's a significant event happening at the company, which could be a debate, could be a discussion, could be a board meeting. Write down the feelings, the 10 worst feelings you had over the last hour and a half in that board meeting or a department meeting. Well, I felt dismissed. I felt unresponded to. I felt all the negatives, but also all the positives, and then start weighing them up. Next time you go into this board meeting, ask yourself, do I want to feel that same way again? But read all these emotions beforehand. And it has an immense effect on letting you know that this is not what you want to expose yourself to. So then you have one of two choices. You can either show up in that board meeting differently, or you can decide that this board meeting is just no longer for you and you need to go somewhere else. I mean, it's that simple.
So you're working with CEOs, but also employees of the company to sort of realize whether they're, how to sort of empower the employees and also to help the CEOs engage with their employees.
Absolutely. And I think that's engagement is a big part, right? How do we engage? I mean, I for myself, I used to be the guy who, would fly down a hallway and you walk into someone's office and you put your hands on the desk and you say, hey, everything okay? Everything okay? Good. Everything's okay. And on. Well, that's not connecting. That's not engaging. That's not engaging with somebody, but that's also not fostering engagement of the employee to the company. But it's kind of the generation that I initially grew up in. Do what you say and say what you do, and you're told what to do.
And no communication in between.
No. And emotions, don't talk about emotions. Don't talk about what happens outside of work. Keep that stuff outside. That's not what we want to talk about. We don't want to hear about it. That's just distraction. So it's a little bit the old traditionalist approach. Not a little bit. That is the old traditionalist approach. Versus the young generation now. What they're looking for is really two things. They're looking for connection. They're looking for emotional connect. But they're also looking for engagement on a level that allows them to make an impact. And an impact where they really, with whatever they do, they actually make a difference. And they want to make a difference. They want to be able to say, wow, you know what I'm doing here, what it is that we're doing as a company, that really makes a difference. and they want to feel connected to that on a very deep emotional level.
So how do they feel aligned, for example, with company values? I mean, how do you connect the individual with the company values? How do they sort of make sure that they're aligned?
I mean, company values, I mean, we're making company values and mission of companies and vision of company, or make it so complicated. Oftentimes, particularly if you're looking kind of a close touch organization, and particularly if there's high touch between the executive suite and the rest of the workforce, the vision of a company is nothing else, and in a simplistic manner, the translation of the values of the CEO or the co-founders translated into an action statement. It's that simple. And what happens is we overcomplicate it, and we also don't ask ourselves, does that align to my personal values and my personal mission statement? So oftentimes what we do is we start really on a senior leadership in particular, we ask people to write a personal mission statement. What is it that they live their life for? What are the kind of the guiding values they have? And what are some of the values they're really completely, off-centered on? I'll start with my own story again. I used to talk about integrity quite a bit, and I used to talk about here's what integrity is, and integrity, you have it or you don't. It's not something you choose. Well, guess what? On the other side, while I'm talking about this, I did not have integrity. And it took me probably until 4 years ago to really be able to start seeing the discrepancy that I've lived my entire life.
So you were talking about it, but you weren't living it.
Absolutely. And it doesn't matter if that's in a personal relationship, if that's in a business relationship, doesn't matter. Like the way you live your values, if that's in a marriage, if that's in a partnership, if that's in a friendship, wherever it is, the consistency of your choices or the consistency of your being, having integrity or authenticity or truth or honesty or whatever it may be, the big words that you attach yourself to, they have to be consistent. They have to be real, because people know the difference. Even though we think when we're in the middle of it, we look like we're golden. We got it all squared away, and nobody can ever tell. Well, you know what? People can tell the difference, and it's just this instinctual piece of. It's almost like between animals when two dogs come at each other and they look and stare at each other. Well, they know what's going on. And human beings, from a chemistry standpoint, as we come 6 to 8 feet into proximity of each other, there's chemistry going to happen. And that's just a fact. And there is moments of where we then determine, are we going to really, trust each other, and we're going to start co-creating and building a platform of trust? Or is there kind of that push away, which just doesn't feel right? It's oftentimes I talk about, the 3 brains. There's your brain, there's your heart brain, and there's your gut brain.
Yeah.
If those 3 don't align, something's off. Yeah. And that's usually a pretty good indicator that something is off. Yes. And again, I mean, I invite everybody, check that sometimes, multiple times a day. Does it feel right? Does it seem in alignment? And if it's not, start investigating.
So, and that's the same as, working for a company.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And I think that's, there's no, I'm going to be this person when I'm at work and I'm going to be that person when I'm at home. I think then more you can bring those 2 pieces in alignment, while certainly with boundaries. Don't bring all your stuff home, because I think it's important to have those boundaries and the respect for, if you bring some things home to your partner, to your wife, to your significant other, be respectful of that, because there's a different level of engagement, and there is room to talk about things, but don't just, throw it in the front door and say, well, this is what I got to talk about. Well, again, self-awareness, respect, grace, engagement. How do we communicate about these things?
And especially now, the younger generation, they want more engagement at work. So it's, better engagement at work, better results, happy customers, so
no doubt.
Yeah. So how do you fully engage your employees in terms of being on board with your vision?
So let's talk about what engagement, how do we define engagement? employee engagement. And in the United States, so I'm based in Boston, we work globally, but I'm based in the US, and a lot of the data that I look is US based. We have currently about 75 to 80% of active disengagement. That means people
Yes.
come to work, but they're choosing very consciously to do something else. If that's social media as number one culprit, to messaging services, et cetera, et cetera. So we all know the conversation here.
Mm-hmm.
And the distraction of social media and the water cooler conversations and open office spaces. And that's a whole other conversation since about a couple of years. We've had it over at the Harvard Innovation Lab in terms of, are open office spaces really that helpful? Probably not, because the way as human beings from a creativity and production center, also neuroscientifically, the way we're set up, there is something to be said about having a little bit of your own space at the right time in the right moment, potentially going in and out of that. But back to your question, engagement. The way we define employee engagement is what is the emotional commitment of the employee to the organization? Let me say this again. What is the emotional commitment of the employee to the organization? Here's what that means. If I tomorrow morning need to go to a sales presentation with you at 7 a.m. and we have a 5:15 a.m. flight, and I go partying until 1 o'clock tonight, and I drink and party and I completely, crash myself, and I show up tomorrow morning at 5:15 at the airport completely stripped of my mind, my emotional commitment to the company is probably not that high. Because what I've done is I have blatantly demonstrated that I don't really give a shit.
Yeah.
And that I'm going to do whatever I want to do. And I have no consideration or respect whatsoever to you as my colleague who's going with me through the presentation, or to the company, because we have a responsibility in the context of executing the mission, the strategy, ultimately supporting the vision of the company. That is at the easiest level, a way to define, is the employee engaged or not? Again, the emotional commitment of the employee to the organization. So employee engagement, the old days then, I mean, I'm a startup guy. I remember the first thing we did is when we had our first office, we wanted everything from a Pac-Man machine to a table tennis, to a table foosball table we had in the office. And every minute we could go into the room where the foosball table was. Well, that was like, yay, we're going to go back there and we're going to get some tension out and we're going to scream and bitch and yell. And I remember we had next door, we had a guy who was a photographer who was taking high school pictures while, we were 5 guys and a foosball table as a startup. And we were bitching at each other, and he could hear it like next door while he's taking pictures of, 8, 10, and 12-year-olds. And the mother's going, oh my God, is that the way they're screaming about over foosball tables?
Yeah.
Although they didn't probably know that we were playing necessarily foosball. But so that's not engagement, right? Having a gummy bear container and having chips, and that's not employee engagement. That's not employee culture. And this is the key word.
Let's talk about culture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's the key word now, right? How do I, from a standpoint of employee engagement, how do I as the employee know that this is my culture? This is my tribe. This is my people. Again, there's the alignment, brain, heart brain, and the gut brain. That's a good first indicator. Yeah. Do they feel like me? Do they smell like me? Do they look like me? And that sounds funny when I say it this way, but there's some truth to that.
Yeah.
And then the second piece being, engagement is active participation. It's not just being told what to do. It's being invited to the table. And there needs to be a fora where people can stand up and say what they think. They get to contribute. In a technology company, there may be a daily stand-up. In a technology company, if we think about agile project management, the flexibility, at what input levels, am I just doing what I'm told, or am I invited to actually contribute? That kind of an engagement is very, very important. Is engagement defined in sense of, do I just get stuff done for you? Or how is my contribution really relevant to the success of what the organization ultimately does? So it's little levels like that. So there needs to be, engagement also on a very one-to-one level. Empathy in the context of culture is a huge piece. Right? I always very distinctly make a difference between empathy and compassion. Compassion is kind of like I'm sitting on the other side. I'm going, yeah, I'm sorry for you. That's like the spectator sport. Versus if I'm empathetic, I'm coming over and I'm saying, wow, you know what? I get it. I've been there. I know this hurts. What is it that you need right now?
Yeah, understanding.
And it's exactly. And so that's where, again, the invitation to participate, the invitation to relate, that's all part of employee engagement. And yes, there's, sorry, go ahead.
No, what would you say was, I mean, a healthy company culture? I mean, we're talking about employee engagement, but a healthy company culture that people engage with.
Well, people engage, everything. Yes, there needs to be fun to play. There needs to be fun to be able to retract to yourself. There needs to be privacy for the individual. There needs to be grace. There needs to be respect. There needs to be dialogue. There needs to be access on all levels in terms of the hierarchy of the company. There needs to be, there needs to be room that if I have self-care needs, that I can exercise those. I think a big part of employee engagement that's healthy is being able to exercise good self-care. That also means I need to be able to have time to exercise, to do what I'm passionate about in the context of maybe community service. I think that's a great part also, to always engage people and to bring them outside while making an impact and a difference, and having a service-driven culture there as well, which doesn't just focus on the organization itself.
And also empowering the individual by giving them upskilling and reskilling time to sort of be better at what they're capable of being.
I think you just brought brilliant. You just brought a great point up. I think, in the old days, we used to have the selfish culture of, I want you to be good just for me. And it's me as an organization. So if I upskill you, then you're going to leave me. Well, that's not the way to think about it.
No.
Because there's no greater gift that you can give an employee or somebody who you work with, doesn't matter at what level, even at an executive level, to say, hey, listen, we're not threatened by you becoming better. We want you to be the possible best that you can be. That could be an executive, that could be a CEO, send them to an executive training, send them to Wharton, send them to Harvard, send them to MIT, send them to wherever you want to send them to. Internationally, and there's there's so many great international business schools, but send them there without the fear of that they're going to leave you then, because that's being selfish. But good company culture and good engagement says, I want you to be the very best that you can be, because it's a trust thing as well, right? Yes. Building trust. If I don't give you trust, then you're not going to give me trust either.
Exactly. And that's the same in relationships.
It's a balancing act. And it's not about being particularly timid about it, but I think we're getting much better at it, that companies are saying, you know what, yeah, go. I want you to go to a training, and I want you to come back and just, blow the roof off. And if then in a year or 2 or 3 you leave, you know what, that's okay. That's still a good investment in you, which is not with this ulterior motive of, I'm only going to invest you if we didn't get all the benefit of it. And that's just not the way it works. And I think the biggest, attest to a company is when people, and we've seen it, and I've talked to many CEOs in this respect over the last month and a half, 2 months about it. A lot of people had to be furloughed. A lot of people had to be let go. But these people, if it was done in a transparent and kind of empathetic manner, they have only good things to say about the company.
That's employee branding. Yeah.
And that is the biggest compliment you can give an organization. If I say to you know what, sorry,
your Glassdoor review has gone up.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
I mean, we look at, talking about, what companies do we on a business development side, we sometimes work with. We sometimes go on Glassdoor and we look at the worst Glassdoor reviews. And usually I say to my business development guys, let's call them. They got problems. They got issues. Let's have a conversation. Now, the craziest piece oftentimes is then, even though they know that, they've seen it, and it's not a difficult fix. And they're going through, I mean, we talked with one company, just to kind of give you the extreme.
Yeah.
Organization, 2,000, close to 2,000 employees, more than 53% employee turnover. The numbers, just by the average of industry, is probably in the range of $2.2 to $2.6 million of loss per year.
Wow.
Complete refusal of investing about $250,000 of fixing, of starting to put a process in place to fix culture, employee relations, engagements, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I mean, speechless.
Yeah.
But that's what sometimes, also certain industries, they look at the data, they say, that's just what it is, and we're just going to deal with that. The question I always like to ask, and on the other side is the employee, and say, how do you feel about actually working for a company like this? And again, the answer is, well, that's why they got 55% of employee turnover.
Mm-hmm. You're like the doctor in the middle, aren't you? Sort of.
Yeah, sometimes we're the diagnostic team. Sometimes we're the
fixer.
Yeah, I don't like to call myself the fixer, but it is a little bit of that, and I like it. It's very strategic, oftentimes, and it's actually a lot of fun, particularly when you look back at it afterwards and you kind of see the impact of it. It's just absolutely fascinating. It's a lot of fun.
And especially now during these difficult times, you're seeing people having to adapt and change according to the period we're going through, and the speed of lightning in terms of how technology is working, and but there's so much you can help with right now, surely.
Well, and I think the other piece is what we need to remember is we're human beings, right? I mean, as much as I can be the CEO of an organization and say, oh my God, I'm really sorry, we got to let 100,000 we got to let 100 people go. We need to save some on the payroll. We need to do this. We need to do that. The reality of it is, I'm a human being as a CEO myself. So even though that I need to come across as a strong person and the person who's thought it through, there's fear, there's anxiety, there's uncertainty, there is, I'm sorry, I can't put it any other way, that if you would have told a lot of these CEOs 6 months ago that this is what's going to happen, I mean, talk about holy shit moments. That never anybody would have expected that, right?
No.
But that's also where I think, and if you're a CEO, please hear me on saying this. Stop the arrogance. You're not different. You're not better. You're not a better human being. You're not a worse human being. You're just like everybody else.
Be human.
And this is exactly, you are human. Be the fucking weirdo you can be, and be proud of it, and be authentic about it. Sorry, I'm ruining all your bleeps here in the talk. But the point is, it's own your piece. Be authentic. Be vulnerable. Be afraid. Let people know you're afraid, because here's what's going to happen. If they relate to you and you're being authentic, they're going to come and help you.
Yes.
It's going to become a team. It's going to become a team effort of pulling that wagon out of the dirt. And we've all seen it happen. And this is where the greatest moments of building employee culture happen. We've seen it in the last recession. We're going to see it again this time. The opportunity is there. Just make it available to your people and let them know you're okay with this. It's not perfect. And guess what? They already know. You don't need to tell them that. But sometimes we got to give them permission to say, you know what? Yeah, I'm stuck. I need help.
Exactly.
And that's
show your true colors.
Yeah, and it's just human behavior.
Yeah.
And it's and being defensive about it and overly aggressive and dismissive, that's not helpful.
No. And so what are you finding, like, your demands in terms of clients? Are they changing right now?
Meaning in terms of what clients are looking for?
Yeah, what clients are looking for.
It's interesting. So one of the things which has been really kind of a part that we've honed into is kind of a transformational moments, which goes really back to what I just described and what I just talked about, where we really kind of contain engagements to 8 weeks to 12 weeks and say, you know what, here's the transformation that you're looking for based on that we've identified some very significant or particular needs of the organization or the individual. And as I said earlier, oftentimes it always pulls down to the individual, and it pulls down to the factor of, well, this is what this individual needs or what the organizational needs in order to bring this individual along. Here's how some of the direction has changed, the strategy, kind of the alignment with the executive team. And I think that's another big part where we engage right now, kind of executive alignment. You know, is it a giraffe? Is it an elephant? Is it a zebra? Because through the changing market dynamics, through the changing employee needs and employee demands and market demands, what needs to happen is there needs to be a gradual shift also in the alignment of the executive team. And oftentimes there's always a stronghold of 1 or 2 or 3. Let's take an executive team of 10, 15 people. There's often a stronghold there of 2, 3 people. And how do we kind of take that and kind of bring it over into the entire team? That is, requires alignment, but requires acknowledgement in the first place that we're not aligned. And there's oftentimes right at that level, there's reluctance. And that's where we, this day and age, we see ourselves engaging quite a bit to help establish the fact we're not aligned.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But what do we need to align on? How do we align? And who do we need to support in order to become aligned with us? So it becomes, we're all pulling in the same direction and we're not going into 16 other directions.
Yeah. So, well, that's a great thing to focus on. I mean, alignment in companies and people and making sure that everybody is on the same page.
Yeah.
Well, Stephan, that's great. A bit of information from you and from you and you've got plenty to talk about, I know, but I wanted to keep this to the right amount of time to listen to. And look forward to hearing more from you and the Human Innovation Garage in the future. And very much, let's see what comes out of this in terms of when we are able to get back on the street and have that human connection. Because
Katrina, thanks.
We're managing to do it like this now. So it feels a bit weird, but it's still real at the same time.
Hey, the fact is you and I are almost on opposite sides, not quite opposite sides of the world, but you're in one of my favorite spots in Barcelona, which I had in one of my last startups. I think I shared this with you during open content. It's been a stronghold area there, particularly with the university. It was always fascinating to be there. So yes, but it makes these kinds of connections even so much more enjoyable and valuable. So thank you again. And, everybody, yourself and everybody, all of your listeners, stay safe and pleasure being here. Thank you.
Great. We'll speak soon.
Talk soon. Bye.
Talk soon.